The mockery of minds, the crystalline spires of Xantheros Prime, stretched impossibly high into the violet twilight, their surfaces pulsing with neural energy that would have driven lesser beings mad within moments. Brother Kale stood at the center of the great amphitheater, his simple brown robes a stark contrast to the shimmering, translucent forms of the Gentari Council that surrounded him in ascending tiers. High cerebrant nexus, his form a constantly shifting matrix of living crystal, and pure thought descended from the highest platform. Where humans had faces, Nexus possessed a constellation of flickering neural nodes that conveyed contempt more eloquently than any sneer. Behold, Nexus's voice resonated directly within every mind present, the primitive from the outer spiral. A creature that still requires vocal cords to communicate, that thinks in linear sequences, that feels emotions like some base animal. Waves of telepathic laughter rippled through the assembled Genthari, their crystalline bodies chiming in harmonic mockery. Kale remained still, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, gray eyes steady as mountain stone. The years of meditation in the ancient monastery on Terra had taught him patience beyond measure. He had faced storms that could tear flesh from bone, and had found peace in their fury. "Tell us, monk," another cerebrant interjected, her neural patterns blazing with intellectual superiority. "What wisdom can your species possibly offer to minds that have transcended the limitations of flesh and feeling?" The assembled Genthari began their mental assault waves of telepathic energy designed to overwhelm and humiliate. They projected images of human wars, of Earth's dying ecosystems, of the species' countless failures and limitations. Each wave was meant to crush his spirit, to force into his knees an acknowledgement of their superiority. But Kale stood unmoved, like a pillar of calm in a hurricane of alien thought. His breathing remained steady, his heart rate unchanged. Something deep within him began to stir not anger or fear, but a profound stillness that seemed to expand outward from his core got in the highest tier of the amphitheater, partially hidden. Behind a neural dampening field, Zara Voss watched with growing fascination. Her hybrid nature born of a forbidden union between human and Genthari allowed her to perceive both the telepathic assault and the monk's remarkable resilience. Her violet eyes, inherited from her human mother, tracked every subtle shift in his posture, every measured breath. There was something about this human that even the mighty Genthari Council had failed to understand. The silent stormed the assault, intensified as Commander Thylex stepped forward, his crystalline form crackling with aggressive neural energy. Unlike the more refined cerebrants, Thylex had spent centuries studying human military tactics, convinced that understanding one's enemy was the path to absolute victory. Perhaps Thylex's mental voice dripped with disdain. The creature requires physical stimulus to respond. He began projecting images of human suffering every war, every genocide, every moment of despair from humanity's blood-soaked history. The telepathic barrage was designed to break minds, to force even the strongest human consciousness to fracture under the weight of their species. Collective guilt. Zara flinched in her hidden alcove, her dual nature making her sensitive to both the cruelty of the assault and the profound sadness it contained. Her human side wept for the pain being inflicted, while her Genthari heritage marveled at the technical precision of the attack. But Kale remained unchanged. If anything, he seemed to grow more centered, more present. His breathing deepened, and those closest to him began to notice something unprecedented. The neural static that surrounded all consciousness seemed to quiet in his presence. "Fascinating," whispered Cerebrant Vex, her analytical mind racing. "The creature's neural patterns are actually stabilizing under pressure. This should be impossible." Kale finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the vast amphitheater without amplification. "I have spent 40 years in silence, learning to listen to the spaces between thoughts. Your words and images are like wind through leaves, powerful. but ultimately impermanent. The simplicity of his statement sent ripples of confusion through the assembly. This was not the broken plea they had expected, not the desperate justification of an inferior species. This was something else entirely. Zara found herself leaning forward, her hybrid senses detecting something her pure-blood relatives were missing. The monk's words carried harmonics that resonated beyond mere language. They seemed to touch something primal and long forgotten in the Gentari consciousness. "You speak of transcendence," Kale continued, his gray eyes moving slowly across the assembled beings. "But I sense great emptiness within your crystalline perfection. You have gained the ability to share thoughts, but you have lost the capacity to truly feel them." High cerebrant Nexus's form blazed with indignation. "Feelings are the domain of lesser beings. We have evolved beyond such primitive responses. Have you?" Kale asked quietly. "Or have you simply learned to fear them so completely that you convinced yourselves they were weakness?" The question hung in the air, like a challenge that none of them had expected to face. Words like lightning, the great amphitheater fell silent for the first time in centuries. The constant hum of neural energy, the subtle telepathic chatter that formed the background of Gentari existence, diminished to a whisper. Even the crystalline walls seemed to lean inward, as if the very architecture was straining to hear what would come next. Kale closed his eyes and drew a breath that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. When he opened them again, something had changed. The gray of his irises held depths that hadn't been there moments before, as if ancient wells of wisdom had suddenly been uncapped. "Let me tell you about the morning my teacher died," he began, his voice carrying a quality that made even the most arrogant cerebrant lean forward. "I was 17, filled with questions that burned like acid in my mind. I demanded to know why the universe allowed suffering, why consciousness was cursed with pain." Zara felt her breath catch. She had expected philosophical discourse, perhaps some primitive human mythology. Instead, the monk's words seemed to bypass her analytical mind entirely, striking directly at something deeper. She was 93 years old, her body failing, her breathing labored. But when I asked my angry question, she smiled. And in that smile, I saw something that all your neural networks and crystalline matrices cannot compute: the profound joy of a soul that had learned to love existence itself, pain and all. The words rippled through the amphitheater, but not as sound. They moved like water through crystal, finding hairline cracks in the Gentari's perfect facades. Several beings in the lower tiers began to shift uncomfortably, their neural patterns flickering with something they couldn't identify. "Your teacher was delusional," Thylax projected harshly, but his usual confidence wavered. "Pain is inefficiency. Suffering is error. Joy is chemical manipulation of primitive brains." Kale turned to face the commander directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of accumulated silence. "Then why do you tremble when I speak of it?" The question struck Thylax like a physical blow. His crystalline form actually shuddered, neural patterns scattering in confusion. Around the amphitheater, other Genthari began to experience something unprecedented doubt. Zara pressed her hand to her throat, feeling her pulse quicken. The monk's words weren't just challenging their beliefs. They were awakening something within her that her hybrid nature had always suppressed. Her human mother had died when she was young, but she suddenly remembered the lullabies, the gentle touch, the unconditional love that her Genthari education had taught her to classify as weakness. "You have convinced yourselves that transcendence means the absence of feeling," Kale continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But what if transcendence means feeling so completely, so purely, that individual pain becomes part of universal compassion?" High cerebrant Nexus's form blazed with desperate intellectual fury. "Impossible. We have studied your species for millennia. We know your limitations, your failures, your inevitable extinction. "Then you know nothing," Kale replied simply. "Because you have never learned the most essential truth of consciousness, that to truly understand another being, you must first be willing to be changed by them." The words hung in the air like the moment before lightning strikes, and in that silence, something ancient and terrible began to stir within the perfect crystalline hearts of the Gentari. Hearts. Across the void, the first crack appeared in Cerebrant. Vex's crystalline structure, a hairline fissure that glowed with an inner light she had never seen before. She stumbled backward, her neural patterns chaotic, as emotions flooded through her consciousness like molten metal through glass. What is happening to me?" she whispered, her usual telepathic communication failing as something raw, more immediate took hold. Kale's voice was gentle now, filled with the compassion of someone who had walked through his own darkness. "You are remembering what it means to be alive." The effect spread like wildfire through the amphitheater. Gentari, who had not spoken aloud in centuries, began to cry out as waves of suppressed emotion crashed over them. Some experienced joy so pure it shattered their crystalline forms. Others felt grief for the first time, mourning for the connections they had severed in their pursuit of perfect logic. Zara could no longer remain hidden. She leaped from her concealment, her hybrid form flickering between states as her dual nature finally found balance. Her violet eyes streamed with tears she had never allowed herself to shed. "Stop," she called out, but not to Kale. She was facing the council, her voice carrying both human passion and Gentari authority. "Can't you see what he's giving us? We've been calling it weakness, but it's the missing piece of everything we've tried to become." Commander Thylex, his form now shot through with fractures of brilliant light, pointed a trembling appendage at the monk. "He's destroying us. This is exactly why we evolved beyond such primitive responses." But Kale stepped forward, and for the first time since the trial began, he smiled. It was the expression of such profound peace that even the most terrified Gentari felt their panic begin to subside. "I'm not destroying you," he said softly. "I'm showing you what you really are, beneath all that beautiful crystal beings, capable of love so vast it could heal the galaxy itself." Zara found herself moving toward him, her steps guided by something deeper than conscious thought. When she reached him, she took his weathered hands in her own, feeling the warmth of human flesh against her semi-crystalline skin. "You're not like other humans," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through both their beings. "And you're not like other Gentari," he replied, his gray eyes reflecting the light of her transformed state. "Perhaps that's why we can understand each other." The moment their consciousness touched human empathy, meeting Gentari intellect, a new form of communication was born. Not the cold perfection of pure telepathy, nor the limitations of verbal language, but something richer, more complete. They shared not just thoughts, but the full spectrum of experience, memory, emotion, hope, and the startling realization that they were falling in love across the vast chasm of species around them. The amphitheater was transforming. The sterile, crystalline architecture began to pulse with warmer light as the Gentari discovered that emotion didn't destroy logic, it gave it meaning. The Bridge of Souls. 3 days had passed since the trial that changed everything. The great amphitheater had been transformed into something unprecedented, a space where crystalline logic and human emotion coexisted in perfect harmony. Gentari and human delegates worked side by side, their different forms of consciousness creating a symphony of understanding that neither species could have achieved alone. Kale stood on a balcony overlooking the city, watching as the rigid crystal spires began to incorporate organic curves, as if the very architecture was learning to breathe. Zara approached from behind, her form now stable in its hybrid state, no longer hiding her dual nature, but celebrating it. "The council has reached a decision," she said, settling beside him. Her skin held the translucent quality of living crystal, but it was warm to the touch, pulsing with the rhythm of a heart that had learned to feel. "And?" Kale asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "They want to establish a permanent embassy on Earth, not to study humans as specimens, but to learn from them as teachers." She paused, her violet eyes reflecting the transformed cityscape. "They want you to be the first human ambassador to Zentharos Prime." Kale was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of young Genthari playing in a garden where living plants now grew alongside crystal formations. "What do you want?" he asked finally. Zara turned to face him fully, her expression vulnerable in a way that would have been impossible for her people just days before. "I want to explore this connection we've found. I want to learn what it means to love someone whose consciousness is so different from mine, yet so perfectly complementary." Their first kiss was a revelation that sent ripples through both their neural networks. Human passion met Genthari precision, creating something entirely new love that was both deeply felt and perfectly understood. The city around them seemed to pulse in harmony with their joined consciousness. "The galaxy is vast," Kale murmured against her lips, his weathered hands cradling her crystalline face. "There are probably hundreds of species out there, each convinced they've found the one true path to transcendence." "Then perhaps," Zara replied, her voice carrying the harmonics of shared thought, "it's time someone showed them that transcendence isn't about choosing between heart and mind, but about discovering how they can dance together as the twin suns of Zentharos Prime, set behind the transformed skyline, casting everything in shades of gold and violet. Two beings from different worlds held each other close. Around them, a new form of civilization was being born, one that would carry the message of unity across the stars. In the months that followed, their love story became legend. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real, a testament to the truth that consciousness, in all its myriad forms, was most beautiful when it dared to be vulnerable enough to truly connect. The monk who had come to face mockery had instead sparked a revolution of the heart, and in the arms of a woman who was both alien and familiar, he had found his own transcendence, not in the absence of feeling, but in the courage to feel everything the universe had to offer. The stars themselves seemed to sing of their love, carrying the message across the void, that wisdom without compassion was merely clever emptiness, and that the greatest strength lay not in perfection, but in the willingness to be transformed by another's truth.